right. So thank you. Welcome today to our webinar on hygienic design. It's a topic that I think is so important that sites may not fully understand. So we've got a great speaker today. He's going to give you a little insight to hygienic design, especially if you've really not been introduced to that concept before. So I'm going to introduce Dan White to you. And Dan has over 20 years of experience. So I know he looks like a really young guy, but he's been around for a little while in the industry, and he's had lots of manufacturing experience. So experience with hygienic design. He has a master's degree, so he is educated in operations management, has had lots of leadership roles, has worked for some pretty, well-known companies there. You might recognize a few names, but right now he works for Safety Chain. And Safety Chain is one of SQF's partners, if you will. You all always come and support us at our SQF Unites conference. And we just appreciate the fact that you all are so supportive of SQF and what we do here. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for coming. And yeah, let's just get started with our webinar.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tammy. So a couple of objectives over the course of this webinar. We're going to talk about what is hygienic design, when it's used throughout the facility, a couple of the best principles, and then, what are auditors actually looking for?
That's what everybody wants to know. At the end of the day, what do the auditors need to have for verification?
All right, so what's hygienic design? For some people, it's a foreign concept. For a lot of the larger manufacturers, you have a pretty approved process of actually onboarding a new piece of equipment. But hygienic design refers to the practice of engineering facilities, equipment, and processes in a way that, a couple things, minimizes the risk of contamination, ensures food safety, and enables the effective cleaning and sanitation of that piece of equipment or area in your facility. Basic principle, if you can't see it, you can't clean it, inspect it, or swab it. So you need to have areas that are easily accessible so that you can actually get to them to ensure that you're cleaning it appropriately.
Absolutely. Just to add, Koo's doing a great job of putting in the chat. If you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type them in. I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have a particular question about a slide, let us know. We'll be happy to answer that. So, Dan, you've got facilities, equipment, and processes. So I think today we're going to focus largely on equipment and then throw in a few comments on some other things. But today we're going to really dive in kind of on the equipment piece, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, pictures, great. So as you see, everybody's going to dwell on that one first. So any of the photos that you see in here, these are actually photos that I've taken over the course of my career in facilities. And then I'll talk to the left, and then I'll tell you exactly where that came from. So when is hygienic design used? When you purchase new equipment, and we should say used equipment that is new to you, the initial hygienic design review should actually start before you sign contracts and order that piece of equipment. We all work really, really hard to get that CapEx to order the piece of equipment that we've wanted forever. It's going to improve every aspect of our lives. And then sometimes it shows up and it's not what we wanted or needed. So you actually need to start that, hygienic design review before you actually get that piece of equipment. And key things, you need to encompass a holistic view of that equipment and your facility. So obviously you need to identify the piece of equipment, what it's making, and what your purpose is. And how you're going to clean it. That's one key element. But, if you buy the most state-of-the-art piece of equipment and you put it in a room with, chipped up concrete floors and a leaking ceiling, then, all of that good work beforehand is you kind of lost it. So the other thing too is that anytime, and we see this a lot, every piece of equipment that goes into a facility, it's pretty rare that it's a plug and play. You're adapting piping, you're moving walls, you're doing a lot of things to ensure that that piece of equipment fits your purpose. So you need to actually, every time that you alter your system, you need to do a hygienic design review of the alteration of that system. And, this blends right into the picture on the right there. So this photo is actually of a piece of pipe that's on a piece of equipment that should have been CIP. However, when they actually add extended lines in their facility to get this piece of equipment washed, they didn't have enough flow in there. And so, that's, I don't know how many months worth of buildup inside of that pipe, but, that led to product contamination and quite a few issues. We're obviously looking at the visual of this pipe, but the way that I found this in the facility is I actually smelled it. I mean, I took some things apart and I smelled it before I ever saw it. So anytime that you're going to be modifying equipment, moving lines, doing stuff like that, you really, really need to take into context, hygienic design of that addition to your facility.
Okay. So if I can ask a question right now. So um, what's one of the biggest mistakes or errors that sites make when it comes to hygienic design?
Oy, I would say biggest ones, a couple. I mean, I guess I'll give you a couple of them. Number one, when it comes down to like equipment sourcing, not choosing trusted vendors. I mean, it is way cheaper for you to buy a tank off the internet. However, by the time that it gets shipped to America on a crate, on a pallet, you can't inspect that tank. And I've lost count of how many times I've seen new piece of equipment come into facilities that, welds were bad. They weren't made of the stainless that they actually quoted that they were going to be made of. So that's one. I would say that from the new equipment standpoint, it's sourcing equipment without, uh, I guess, validation of the quality of that equipment. The other one too is that, when it comes to hygienic design, especially welding, things like that, it's imperative that somebody's actually qualified to do that. I mean, I grew up on a farm. I can stick two pieces of metal together really, really well. However, I wouldn't consider the welds that I do to be hygienic in nature. So, knowing that if you don't have somebody in your facility who is capable of actually, doing a full penetration weld with a smooth surface on the inside, things like that, outsource it. I mean, it is far worth the extra money for you to get somebody who's qualified to do that than it ever is to, put something in line that may or may not cause contamination later on. And the reality of, issues when it comes down to hygienic design is that they usually don't, it's not something that shows up immediately. I mean, you don't usually tend to start getting those counts right away. It's a week, a month, 3 months later. You look at this pipe, I have no idea when that pipe was cleaned, but that is, not a couple days worth of buildup inside that pipe. So yeah, I mean, those are key elements.
Yeah, and just from personal experience, I went to work in a facility and I got there and they said, there's this ice machine that we bought and it's still sitting in the warehouse, but we can't clean it. And ice machines, anybody that's had experience with ice machines, you all know those can be some nasty pieces of equipment. And so our failure was we didn't do the hygienic design up front. So we waited till it got to our building and then tried to figure out how to clean it. And it was just not possible. As you said, the welds weren't smooth. So there were threaded, fasteners that were exposed, hollow legs. I mean, there were all kinds of things that just really go against a lot of the principles of hygienic design. So if I could just suggest one thing, make sure you do it before you buy a piece of equipment, whether it's new or, like you said, new to you, because
Yeah.
a lot of times we like to find those used pieces of equipment and get those in the building. So that would be one thing I would say. Sooner rather than later is when the hygienic design process should start. So
Absolutely. I mean, so principles of hygienic design, use of sanitary materials and finishes. So, ensure that all food contact surfaces are made of non-toxic, corrosion resistant, and easy to clean materials, such as stainless steel, UHMW. You got smooth welds, no crevices. So, I mean, you need to ensure that things are made of sanitary materials. And that comes down to the checklist that we'll talk about later. And this also goes to the sourcing of equipment from who knows where, the internet. Lots of times it just isn't, it's not a sanitary design. Or the compatibility with the product that you're actually making. I mean, I've purchased equipment before that, for 99% of use cases, it would have been appropriate. However, the product that I was running through it, it broke down the seals on the equipment and, caused rubber to get in the product. So, I mean, you need to look at the product that you're making and the materials of construction to see if they're compatible. Design for cleanability. I mean, it should be, everybody should know that if it's in a plant, it needs to be cleaned. Equipment and plant infrastructure should allow full access to cleaning and inspection, minimal flat surfaces or hollow structures where you can collect water, product, debris, things like that. That goes to the room design as well. I mean, if you're spending a lot of time doing things like covering up electrical panels, or, you don't have your walls covered with either epoxy or, flex board, something like that. I mean, if you're having to cut, I wouldn't say cut corners, if you're having to actually add labor into cleaning the equipment appropriately, then it wasn't designed appropriately. So you need to be able to tear that thing down. Especially that goes for pumps. I mean, I see this a lot of times that, companies sell a lot of CIP capable pumps. And I would argue that companies put a lot of faith in the fact that, that is a wash down pump. But, I don't have enough fingers or toes to tell you how many times I've torn apart a positive displacement pump and found product, packed in there that could carry allergens or contaminants, things like that. So you need to make sure that it's designed for cleanability. Control the product and personnel flow. So obviously you have to separate your raw and your finished product areas. We don't want cross contamination from a raw product over to our processed product. So, establish hygienic zoning in your facility and provide clear pathways for people and materials to reduce cross contamination risk. That could be identified lines on the floor. That could be differentiating employees based on hairnet color or uniform, things like that, or even lunchroom segregations. I see that quite a bit. Going to the sanitary material, the design for cleanability. I mean, this is a photograph, and it is absolutely a hygienically designed piece of equipment. I mean, it started off from the factory in a way that it was always going to be clean. It's a wash down. However, when this vessel was installed by the company that put it in, they didn't appropriately slope the concrete that it's embedded in. And so this piece of equipment is stuck like this forever, essentially. I mean, it would be destructive to tear it apart and actually get it the appropriate way, but it just doesn't drain. I mean, and that goes to the company did everything right. They sourced a excellent tank from a reputable manufacturer. But they skimped when it came down to the contracting, and they went with somebody local who didn't really have food experience. And so now I mean, there's always going to be product residue in the bottom of this. So that goes to you can do most of the steps, but until you do all the steps, you can still have issues.
That's what I was gonna add. So we talked about hygienic design starting in the very beginning, before you even make a purchase, before you even receive a quote. You should let your expectations for hygienic design be known. But a lot of people forget the back side of it. So, installing the piece of equipment, it has to be done correctly as well, or all that money, all that work that you've done is just going to go to waste. So we've talked a little bit about cost here. So does hygienic design cost more money to implement? Do we need to be prepared to pay a higher price for something hygienically designed?
I would say yes. Okay. However, that comes with a caveat in the fact of it's much better for you to pay upfront than it is for you to have a product recall because, bearings exploded in a piece of equipment and got metal in it. Or, you've, or you have a piece of equipment that it costs and it takes an extra 3 hours for somebody to clean it and it shuts your plant down for a couple hours every day. I mean, so it more than behooves us to do all that work on the front end instead of having to do it on the back end. I mean, we all, everybody works in a plant, and I don't work in a plant anymore, but we all go to bed hoping, wishing, and praying that we don't have a recall. So I would say that you do all of your due diligence to ensure that you're making the cleanest product possible. And it's just one less thing that we have to worry about. So I would say that it can cost more money. However, realistically, I mean, do you want me to give them the monetary number, or you want to give them? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So as we talked, there's a stat out there that says for every dollar you put into prevention or preventive costs, and that's what hygienic design is, it's a prevention. For every dollar you put into prevention, you actually save $7 to $10 in cost of quality, of poor quality. So you mentioned recalls, Dan, so those are quite expensive. You mentioned the increased number of sanitation hours. So that's money that's, your line's down for that extra amount of time. So that's product you're not producing because you're having to spend extra time sanitizing. So gosh, prevention is just the way to go. And that's, where hygienic design falls into.
Yeah,
So
for my personal life, I mean, one time I lost an entire, well, I want to say it was 10 days worth of product. And it was because of a couple different things. I mean, it was failures on multiple levels. We had a maintenance tech who did not replace the oil in a gearbox with food grade oil. And then when they put, the non-food grade oil gearbox over the top of the mixer, they forgot to put, the agitator shaft, deflector that would have kept any oil from getting in there. And at the end of the day, it broke. It leaked non-food grade oil into product, and I had to go back the last full wash that I did, which was 10 days ago. So I lost 10 whole days of productivity on one production line for a couple different failures. I mean, obviously it's the oil, but not replacing the deflector screen on top, that's another one. I mean, that cost, I mean, in excess of I could have bought 100 gearboxes for that one mistake. So, I mean, when it comes down to hygienic design, it's no laughing matter. Yeah, and it can cost you greatly.
exactly. So ouch, that one hurt. So one of the big questions is, what's the auditor going to look for? Okay. So, when we train our auditors, we talk to them about the road to Rio, and that's how you gather evidence, looking at records, conducting interviews, and making observations. So I just threw a few things in here, and Dan, you feel free to add to, but for records, hygienic design review records. And you mentioned earlier that that should be done early on. So, it's not just enough to say, hey, you need to design this hygienically, but you have to review it, right? And
Yeah.
so, as the purchasing company.
I was gonna say, ideally, when we're talking about hygienic design, think of it as one aspect of the entire, program. You're putting in a new piece of equipment. I should have everything in one place from, what contractor I'm getting it from. Here's my initial review beforehand. Here's our methodology of how we're going to clean it, things like that. I mean, if you show up with a nice happy binder, for your brand new ice cream mixer, they're going to be very happy auditors to know that you're, doing your due diligence.
Absolutely. Hygienic design checklist, you mentioned it. We've got a slide coming up where you're going to share a checklist that you've used. It's not
Yep,
required for the SQF code, but it is a best practice. We like to see those
absolutely.
things as auditors. So I'll let you talk more about that one on the next slide. But looking at contracts, invoices for purchased equipment. So how does the auditor know that you had hygienic design in mind when you were purchasing equipment? And then maintenance work orders. So Dan talked a little bit about modifications and things that you do internally, making sure that you know that you have somebody that, if you need welds, you have somebody that's trained to do a hygienic weld. So it's smooth, it's continuous, there are requirements there. So, and if you don't have somebody trained in that, outsource. It would be your big thing to do. Interviews, who are you going to talk to? The auditors, they're going to want to talk to everybody. Purchasing should be aware of the hygienic design requirements. Engineering, who's probably assisting on the design of the equipment. Food safety, for sure. We want to know about it, right? Maintenance, sanitation, all those people should be aware of those principles. I should be able to go to a maintenance guy, right, and ask him, what kind of welds are you doing? What do you look for to make sure you've got a good weld? What to ask? When did you start that hygienic design process? When was it first discussed? Were there any changes? What did you do? I mean, I had an experience where we were designing a new piece of equipment, and we upfront said, here's what we expect. We don't, we don't want hollow tubing. And lo and behold, they bring the design back and we're looking at the design and I'm like, is that hollow? And they're like, oh yeah. So
Oh, yeah.
you missed that one, didn't you? So, taking the time to really engage. And so asking people, were there things that they didn't get right the first time? And the auditor may ask you, what was the last piece of equipment that you purchased? Including those things that you buy at those fire sales, online, or modifications to your equipment that would need to be considered for hygienic design. And then observation. So auditors should be going out, they should be inspecting those pieces of equipment. They should be, observing the cleaning and sanitation process to make sure that that's a complete process, and that there are no things that are being hidden, like that first drain that Dan showed us. That was,
Yeah.
pretty nasty thing there. So that's just some of what the auditors are going to look for. But yeah, so talk to us about this checklist, Dan.
Sure. I mean, so it's a sample checklist, and it's aligned with both the SQF requirements and 3A. We'll talk about them later on. But, what this is doing is it's ensuring that you, the customer, are getting the machinery that fits your requirement before purchase. I mean, you as a customer have to do your due diligence. I mean, Tammy told a story, here where, she was very, very specific about her requirements. The manufacturer, either through oversight or trying to cut costs, I mean, a solid leg is a lot more expensive than a hollow leg, opted not to do that. And realistically, it's gonna cost them more money to replace that than it ever would to do it right in the first place. So, it's going to ensure that the end equipment will not cause any additional food safety risks. I mean, we already have enough to worry about from employees showing up with, whatever. We don't want to have to worry about our piece of equipment, adding additional issues. Adheres to generally accepted manufacturing quality and equipment practices. I mean, there's a lot of different specifications that you can go on. Ideally, it's going to be clean, it's going to be smooth, it's going to be tear down, it's going to be made of food ready, food compatible piece of equipment. And then here's another big one. You need to have sign-offs from all affected departments. From operations, they need to sign off that it's going to fit their requirements. Maintenance needs to sign off that, hey, this is something that we can actually work on. You need to have QA involved, to inspect and make sure that, that piece of equipment is going to fit your needs. And then sanitation, a big one. I mean, before that piece of equipment shows up there, you should have an idea of how long it's going to take to clean it and what are the requirements. I mean, key things about the checklist. This is your first, I guess this is your first method of, if you have any issues with that piece of equipment when it shows up, of being able to go back with the manufacturer, because you need to provide this with the manufacturer that here are my exact requirements for this piece of equipment, this process, this whatever. Are you capable of filling those requirements? If they tell you no, then I mean, obviously look for a new vendor. If they tell you yes, then hold them to that. I mean, if they sign off that, we're going to create this piece of equipment for you hygienically, and they don't do it, the onus is on them. I mean, we're trying to remove liability from us as a company. That's one of the primary goals of this, is that, in the event that anything goes wrong, I mean, holding vendors accountable, from the manufacturer of the equipment to whoever installed it. If you did it, then it's on you. But, if you're hiring outside contractors, I mean, you need to make sure that all of your T's are crossed and I's are dotted before you get that piece of equipment. And dependent upon the cost of the equipment itself, it might actually behoove you to send somebody there before they even ship it to your facility to ensure that, they've adhered to it. That goes back earlier to what I was talking about sourcing tanks and stuff like that from, differing countries. If something's made for me on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, and I only spent $5,000 on this, or 10,000 or whatever, I'm probably not going to send somebody over there to inspect it before it gets here. But once it shows up at my facility, what recourse do I have for them to make it right? I mean, it's going to take me as the owner of this newly purchased piece of equipment that's not sanitary, to make it right, if I can make it right. I mean, Other things that we're seeing too, even from the outside of the materials of construction. I mean, I've seen pieces of equipment show up with non-food grade grease covering it that is extraordinarily difficult to remove. They have, or it shows up and the exterior is stainless, but the interior of it is all carbon steel. I mean, these are things that we all have to check on beforehand. You don't want rusty rollers.
Yeah. And once you get something in your building, it's much harder to get it back to the manufacturer if they did something wrong. So I definitely like the idea, especially for those really expensive pieces of equipment, that you send somebody there and let them look at it beforehand. I mean, that's just a best practice, absolutely. So, okay. So we've got one example of a checklist. I will tell you, if you go on the internet, there are more companies that do checklists for hygienic
Mhm.
design. Um, when I was in the bakery business, we actually used one from the Meat Institute. It was a
Yep.
really good, thorough checklist for hygienic design, and I believe you can, get that one available for download. I think sometimes even looking at your regulatory agencies, I think some of them also have checklists and have requirements around hygienic design where you could get a checklist. So what I guess what we're trying to say is you don't have to start from the beginning. There's
Yeah.
people that have done these things, they've outlined these things that could help you in creating your start in the hygienic design world if you're not there yet. So
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really, really good point about, yes, you're in the baking industry. However, looking at hygienic design for a meat facility. I mean, when I think of baking, usually not blasting things with water hoses all night long. When I think of a meat plant, absolutely. So, it it would behoove you if you're in an industry that I would say only has dry wipe down cleaning or minimal cleaning, hold yourself to a higher standard. I mean, you've got less, I mean, there's less possibility of you ending up in a bad situation from contamination or whatever if you are holding yourself to, dairy standards or meat standards, things like that. So that's one thing to keep in mind before you actually start this process.
yeah, no, that's great to point out. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of commonalities too. So
Yep.
we've mentioned weld several times. So a good weld versus a bad weld for hygienic design, it doesn't matter, which industry you're in. Fasteners, threaded fasteners versus non-threaded, things like that.
Yep.
Those are pretty common, pretty standard across the board. So we have a couple questions in the chat. So I'm going to pause for a second. So somebody wants to know about where they can find backup on my dollar roof prevention is save $7 to $10 in poor quality. So that comes from, I don't know if you're familiar with the Indiana Council, but they put out books for quality control. And so within some of their training manuals, they train on cost of poor quality. So you can find that information there. Also, ASQ does a lot on cost of poor quality. And so there's some resources on their website as well, some literature, some things that you could find that information there. And then here's a question for you, Dan. So does Safety Chain have a template of the sanitary design checklist on their platform? So do you all have anything?
Yes, I mean that's one of our first gear forms that we have. When companies roll out that we've got. I mean, it's cookie cutter and can be, I guess, tailored to the individual facility. But yeah, it's one of the forms that we have.
Okay, that's good. Good to know. Um, yeah, and I encourage people, please look out on the internet. There is some, a lot of information out there. And a lot of it, I found a really nice presentation yesterday from the company that Dan's going to talk about here in a minute that had some pictures and things that really showed, some different aspects of some of the principles of sanitary design that Dan talked about previously. So I think you could find some good information out there as well. All right, so walk us through some key points, Dan. What do we need to remember?
Couple things. I mean, purchase from reputable manufacturers, and I should say contractors as well. There's specific contracting companies, engineering companies that are very experienced when it comes down to installation of food equipment and designing things. You want to pick a reputable manufacturer. Honestly, even from an uptime standpoint, even if we're not talking about, hygienic design, reputable manufacturers, they stand by their product. They've been around for 100 years for a reason. Um, you know, Endless contractors that specialize in food manufacturing for installation. If you don't have anybody local who does that, I mean, trade shows, every trade show I've ever been to has a suite of, people who have experience in flooring and concrete and, whole room construction. And they're gonna work with you, and they'll usually provide they'll if you don't have experience with hygienic design, they actually will assist you in that process. But do your due diligence as well. The other one, ensure the environment the equipment is going in won't contribute to unsanitary conditions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that where you spend all the money on the equipment, put it in a room that is uncleanable. It doesn't matter if you have the best piece of equipment if you can't keep the environment around it clean, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And ensure that potential issues are rectified at the manufacturer and not during installation. When that piece of equipment shows up at my facility, the only thing I want to worry about is whether or not it was damaged in transit and how I'm going to put it in that facility. I don't want to have to, get a piece of equipment and find out that it's got the inappropriate brushes on it, or, then, and this is an example of this picture over here is an example of a piece of equipment that I actually purchased. You can see my DW on my flashlight there. So I purchased this piece of equipment, and the exterior of it looked phenomenal. I mean, polished, great, everything like that. But once I tore into it, I mean, that's a bad weld right there. They'd overheated it, and instead of replacing that piece of piping, it's part of a spray bar. Instead of replacing that, they just figured, hey, it's inside of it. We're just gonna let it fly, and we caught it, and we had to cut it out. It took a little bit of time, but we got it cleaned up. Other one, be leery of purchasing equipment sight unseen at auction. In my personal life, I've been burnt by this. I've worked for some pretty cost prohibitive companies, and sometimes getting a used piece of equipment was what you got. And I've been burned on. I'm trying to think. The last one was a inline blender system that all of the pins were broken inside of it. It cost more to replace that than I paid for the whole thing. So always be leery of purchasing equipment sight unseen at auction. eBay's there for a reason. You want to buy something, maybe send somebody there to look at it before you actually purchase it. And the other one, just use common sense. I mean, a lot of these issues that we see are wholly, I mean, we could wholly avoid them just by, doing our due diligence before we get that piece of equipment. So use common sense when you're purchasing and when you're installing that equipment.
Okay. Yeah, some good key points for us to remember because, I mean, my ice machine that I talked about at the first of the webinar here, where it ended up, I think in a recyclable place. It had a lot of nice stainless on it. So, but it never got put into production because there was absolutely no way for us to fix it after the fact. I mean, there were so many bad welds and areas where water was going to pool, and it just was a terrible design and was not hygienic in any way. And so we ended up just scrapping it, and we spent a lot on that piece of equipment. So just follow the ideas and absolutely do it early on. So we got a couple comments. So somebody suggested using AI. So what do you think, Dan, about using AI to create a hygienic design checklist?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. However, I would absolutely reference that against some reputable sources. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, people use AI quite a bit. It's exceptional when it comes down to, data management or, statistical analysis, things like that. But like anything, trust but verify. So if it tells you to make a checklist, check that against some, verifiable sources to ensure that it's going to fit the needs of your facility. So, I mean, yeah, you can use AI. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, great point. So another comment is I use the AMI sanitary design checklist and I can add it to my safety chain audits. So
Absolutely. And not only can you add it to your safety chain audits, you can add sanitary design review to your safety chain programs. So it goes to
I,
that digital binder, of keeping it all in one place. So when your auditor does come and wants to ensure that, you're doing your due diligence. I mean, it's a pretty rare occasion that anybody, I would say, gets 100% on their audits. I mean, as an auditor, they're not going to give you 100%. I claim victory when I see the super duper minors, like, somebody forgot to check the foot foamer concentration in an hour. That's an auditor who's grasping. You've won if you're to that point. Um, Other things, and I forgot to mention earlier, when it comes down to temporary repairs, you need to take sanitary design into consideration when you're doing temporary repairs, because that's where I see the most audit hits is that, you know, yes, a repair is temporary so that we can get production back up. However, was that temporary repair done hygienically? There's no food grade duct tape out there. Trust me, I've checked.
no
There's no
cardboard
food grade,
either.
yeah, no food grade duct tape, no food grade cardboard. If you've got, we called them ceiling diapers, if you've got those all over the place, figure out how you're going to fix your ceiling. So, when it comes down to hygienic design, obviously institute that when you are doing those temporary repairs. And when I say temporary repairs, a temporary repair needs to be a temporary repair. If it's been going on for 6 months, that ain't temporary. So I would say make sure that you're documenting appropriately how you're going to get those issues resolved. Because from an auditor standpoint, if they hit the floor out there and they see the, cardboard backsplash that keeps product from hitting the floor, they see, a bunch of different tagged items and it's been a year since somebody's actually looked at it. Those are all going to come back. And it's giving the auditor more ammunition to go back and dig deeper in your programs, and they're going to find those issues. It's going to happen. So make sure that temporary repairs that you're taking sanitary and design into account when you're doing that.
Yeah, no, exactly. That makes sense. So let's kind of let me throw this question out there. So I know I've got a lot of people out there that are thinking, okay, my auditors have never asked me about hygienic design. So as auditors get better, they gain more knowledge, as SQF, focuses in on causes for recalls and things, definitely hygienic design is going to be something that's going to be talked about,
Yep.
more often, in our conversations with our auditors. So don't be surprised if your auditor isn't asking you about hygienic design, in your next audit. So if I'm
Yeah.
a site and I'm sitting out, oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, I mean, to that point, every GFSI auditing scheme reflects I guess, the previous issues that we had in the food industry and upcoming issues that, they see are going to be problems. So when we get these updates, I mean, the people might think they just update a couple lines. However, those are adjusted to reflect issues within the food manufacturing industry that had happened within the period since the last update of that GFSI scheme. So you're absolutely right in the fact that I would expect that more sanitary design is going to be under scrutiny in facilities.
Absolutely. So let's say I'm a site, I'm out here listening to Tammy and Dan talk, and I'm listening about what all the auditors are going to be asking me. And I'm thinking, I'm in this facility, it's 100 years old. My equipment's been there for 75 years, and at no time was it ever hygienically designed. So what can I do now? So any tips for people? I mean, it just seems so overwhelming to me
Yeah,
if I
ag-
were in that situation.
agreed. I mean, I started out my career in the dairy industry in a plant that was built in I want to say 32. They started in 32. The first piece of equipment that I ran was onboarded in 57. So, you know, that being said, the first thing that I would begin, is with a risk assessment of the piece of equipment that you currently have. that's where I would start. If it's something that you can trace back that has historically caused you problems, I mean, first evaluate a couple different things. Is the cost of repairs more than it would take for me to source a new piece of equipment in an appropriate time frame? So look at that first. And then after that, I would say if the answer is no, what can I do to bring this piece of equipment up to, I guess, modern standards? You see a lot of times with the older equipment, things like cast aluminum with enamel coating, stuff like that, put on, older pieces of equipment. Is there the ability that without ruining the, effectiveness of this piece of machinery that I can update it? Is it a situation where, in true story, I had a place that had hollow legs on a piece of equipment and it kept filling with milk. So what was the solution to that? Drill a hole in it to make sure that the milk
Train
could
it.
drain out of it. The real solution is to cut that off and put a solid leg on it. But the interim solution was 30 years ago, Timmy drilled a hole in the leg, so it drained. And yeah, it drained. It drained listeria into a drain. So, I mean, obviously, do a risk assessment of the current piece of equipment you have. View whether or not you can update those to modern standards. And if not, then evaluate purchasing new equipment. I mean, we all know that, nothing is cheap in the food industry. It just isn't. So evaluate how you can upgrade those pieces as you go, while ensuring product quality and food safety.
Yeah. And, just because it's not during the design phase, you can still use your hygienic design checklist
Yep.
on an old piece of equipment. You can still go down through there and say, does it have hollow legs? Does it have bad welds? Does it have threaded fasteners that are visible? So you could certainly analyze, and I'm glad you said risk assessment, because, we try to drive that home at SQF all the time. It really does come down to risk and doing that risk assessment. So yeah, utilize the checklist. It doesn't, just because it's been in your building for 50 years, doesn't mean you can't use the checklist on it, to kind of identify where some of those problems are. Now, one more question before we go on, because I know we've got some resources on the next slide, but we've talked money, so how do we get leadership on board? How do we convince them? We've talked about it. It costs more money after the fact. But, I mean, outside of begging and pleading to use a hygienic design or to upgrade a piece of equipment, you've come out of manufacturing facilities, and as a leader, what made you sit up and take notice when the practitioner is talking to you saying, we need to do this, we need to do this? So give us a little insight into what a leader, is looking for to be able to be convinced.
I would say data collection. That's your first step. When it comes down to CapEx money and who gets money, I'll be frank in the fact that, us people who are over here actually, and in the words of one of my coworker, putting the money in the box. We work in the plant, we put the money in the box. However, our reasons for needing new pumps and things like that are never as polished as marketing people needing, an additional head so that they can hand out drinks at a party. That being said, get your data. So it goes back to the common sense and the fact of we know that things in our food and our environment are causing us money, either through product loss or additional time spent cleaning it, or just maintenance costs to maintain this really, really old piece of equipment. So that being said, it's a lot easier for me to get money when it comes down to, I want a new piece of equipment. If I bring an ironclad case in the fact of, this piece of equipment, because it's not washed down, takes me an extra 45 minutes times 6 sanitarians every night. Extrapolate that over the course of the year, that if I get a new piece of equipment, it's actually going to cut that time down by a whole hour. Yeah, takes 45 minutes, but I can actually clean this an hour faster. That talks to a lot of different things. If I get an additional hour of productivity, you can calculate what that hour of productivity is going to cost you. So you can look at labor productivity, product quality losses. That's a big one. I mean, if if you're in a facility and you're losing product, or the other one too is placing product on hold quite frequently, my whole hold and release program, every time I hold that product up, that's money that my company is having to sit on storage, waiting for me to, give me a dispensation on, what to do with these pallets of product. So documenting all of these things, and this is where, I I see from an industry standard that we do, and I would say it's a bad job, but it's a bad job based on the fact that we work in a hectic environment. However, taking the time for you to document that, hey, I've got this gallon filler. It takes this long to clean it. I've had this many product quality holds because the interior of the bowl is pitted or whatever. Document all those. If you bring that, coupled with, when you show up at your CapEx meeting and you want your money, you bring not only it's going to cost me, I don't know, let's say $1 million for this. However, my ROI is 6 months or my ROI is a year. When you bring that level of fact finding, then, I'm going to increase productivity. Here's how much better I'm going to make your organization. It will absolutely make that entire process a lot smoother than it is normally. So bring your justifications for why you need that piece of equipment. I picked on my company. The reality is most companies are run by accountants and salespeople. So speak to money when you want money. Yeah, bring them some actual hard facts.
Absolutely. No, I like it. I'm a data person. So just show me the data and let me make an informed decision. So I love it. That's the best piece of advice I think we could give them. So now let's talk about resources. So we've kind of hinted at resources. We've got the SQF code listed there. So where we talk about equipment and utensils, but share a little bit about one of the resources that you use quite often.
Sure. I mean, I have no affiliation with this organization. However, I cannot possibly sing their praises enough. So when you look at 3A SSI and what they do, and what they've been doing for, I want to say 60, 70 years now. I mean, it is the gold standard for hygienic design in the food manufacturing industry. So if you really want to know about hygienic design, I mean, don't listen to this guy. Hit up the experts. So very, very good things that they have. And, everybody wants to know like what accolades or things I can do to help separate myself within, the manufacturing facility to help my career.
Okay.
One great thing that 3A has is they've got a knowledge center with training that you can do you'll actually get certified. I would recommend this. I would recommend, especially, and I love my maintenance people. However, I would absolutely recommend that every, maintenance person in your facility, excuse me, goes through that program, and that every quality person, and I just say everybody, I mean,
Yeah.
send everybody through that program, and it'll give them, you'll view if you're not accustomed to hygienic design in a facility, you'll view your facility in a completely different way after you take that training course, and they've got great webinars. So, I would absolutely look at 3A SSI. They're an
Okay,
incredible
absolutely.
resource.
And Ku has put the links that are up on the screen in the chat. So anybody can click on those and, go right to the 3A website and check some of those out. So I've got a question slide in here. We don't currently have any questions, but I'm going to let people digest what we've gone over. And I'm going to give them a couple more minutes, but I'm going to let you talk to us a little bit about your organization, Safety Chain. You're the sponsor, the co-sponsor for this webinar today. As I said, you guys do a great job of attending SQF Unites and exhibiting there. So tell us a little bit about Safety Chain.
Sure. I mean, so I guess at the basics, what is Safety Chain? So we're a digital plant management platform. So the way that we operate, I mean, going back to the data collection, I would say that we excel at collecting data and ensuring that people are accomplishing their job appropriately. So that's the nuts and bolts of what Safety Chain does. I mean, we help you collect data and help to action that data. So, if you are, going back to the sanitary design thing, if you are seeing increased counts in an area of your facility, you can dig into where, why, what, how, you were getting those increased counts. So we have the ability that, and we've been installed in 3,500 plants. in every area of manufacturing, from receiving to shipping and everything in between. So key thing, I mean, obviously paper, nobody likes doing paper anymore. I hated doing paperwork when I worked in the facility. And, with the new generation of employees that's coming on board, they're a lot more digitally native. So the ability for them to capture checks and things like that on a, iPad, tablet, whatever, it's a lot more native to them versus, I would say, older methods of manufacturing. And key benefits, I mean, it's going to allow you to action those items as soon as they happen. So instead of waiting a day, for your paperwork review, you'll get a notification immediately that you've got an issue in your facility. So you can rectify that pretty quickly.
Okay. And you've got, I think, one more slide here to talk to us
All
about
right.
ROI.
So it goes back to that ROI. So these are numbers that come directly from the 3,500 different manufacturing facilities that we're in. So every one of Safety Chain's customers, sees a 1 to 3% yield increase through decreasing quality issues in their facility. They see a 30% faster startup time. So some of that comes to documenting sanitation, and now we can help you improve that. And the other one is 50% less overtime and less duplication in paper. I mean, everybody who does paper has to be reviewed on a daily basis. We cut that review time by half. We say half. In some circumstances, it's more like 80%. The other one too is the audit time. So from a SQF, standpoint, one of the best things that we have is that we've actually got a module where every record that is created within Safety Chain is attached directly to the clause level of the SQF code. So that when your auditor shows up there, they tell you, I want to see all of your data from 10/1/25. And within one click, you have everything that was accomplished that day directly linked to whatever aspect of the SQF code that they want to view.
Nice. Okay. Well, we do have a question in the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing. So Carly, I'm going to change your question just a little bit. Okay. So if resources are limited, what are the top 2 to 3 hygienic design improvements that have the biggest impact? And Carly's asking on SQF audit outcomes, but I would say let's change that, because it's not about the audit, it's about food safety. So we're limited in resources and time. So what are the top 2 to 3 things that we should look at to have the biggest impact on food safety? How can we get a quick bang for our buck if resources are limited?
Materials of construction, and I would say pipe fitting. Those are I mean, I can't stress how much having appropriately welded pipes and having cleanable pieces of equipment will do for your facility. And sometimes when it comes down to, I mean, I absolutely know about tight resources. Sometimes looking at that piece of equipment, and I'll use like the inside of a tank or something like that for an example. It could take somebody just going in there and polishing it, polishing, repassivating, things like that. I mean, you don't have to, all of us want, $250 million to start up a new food plant, but there's a reason why we don't see too many new food plants come on board. It's just very expensive. So I would say review the equipment that you currently have and see how you can upgrade that minimally, either through changing out, tables for UHMW or acquiring stainless steel rollers versus carbon steel rollers, things like that. View that first. I'd say that a lot of this, a lot of issues can be resolved through increasing your master sanitation program. And we're talking gasket changes, we're talking, equipment breakdown, pump seal breakdown, things like that. Those are all very, very cost-effective fixes that can definitely impact your product. Key things you usually see with, usually in most facilities, I see decreased productivity with increased food complaints. So, if your line is not running smoothly to begin with, you want to dig into exactly why it is that, you're having those issues. Hopefully
Exactly,
that answered your
because
question.
yeah, no, I think it did. So yeah, so there's some things that you don't have to have, $250,000 to, immediately make an impact. And I think for me, I would probably look at my complaints, look at what's coming in, the feedback, look at my maintenance program. Where is the cost of our maintenance program really excessive? And yeah, maybe there's some things that we can change out and help us, both on productivity as well as quality. So, well, Dan, thank you so much for being here with me today. And I think we've answered everybody's question that was in the chat. But again, thank you all for being here with us. And so SQF Unite, we're getting ready to launch the registration. So it's in St. Louis this year, in the 1st of March. So please check us out. We'll have lots of good education sessions. But again, thank you all for joining us today. And with that, we will say goodbye.
Yeah. Thank you guys.